Moving on up. Moving on up. Oh, welcome everybody to the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus show, live, and we're so happy to have you back here. Moving into what is this? I may count this the Wednesdays, but you know what? This is not one of our regular days. This is our special edition show for the African American History Month. And we're doing a special edition, adding additional days in February to celebrate African American History Month. And I'm so happy to see everyone back here. We've got some interesting stuff we're going to show today. At least I think it's important. I think it's important that all Americans and folks all over the world know what the struggles and what the things that African Americans here in this country and all over the diaspora and just Africans have contributed to society. So you know what? Thank you for being here, And listen, folks, it's not woke Wednesday, so I can't go with my regular spiel, but I can go with all the stuff I love to talk about, and it's mostly going to be, you know what I'm going to talk about. Yes, it's going to be voting rights, but we're not going to jump into it right away, but we're going to go into one of the other regular themes. And one of the other regular themes is talking about COVID-19 and making sure folks are out there doing what they need to do, making sure, hopefully you've made a decision, you've already done your due diligence, and you're getting your vaccinations and you're getting your boosters. You're getting all that stuff because you got to get that stuff. That stuff is important. You want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. You want to make sure that you are also protecting your family. And that's what's important to do out there. And so I'm here by myself, but sometimes I also have my co-host, the beautiful hostess with the mostest. I know you've heard that before, but that is Erin Porcher. She is the interim chair for the Louisiana Democratic Small Business Caucus. And maybe she'll jump in tonight because if she's not on now, she's taking care of family or she's taking care of business. That's right. We are the Small Business Caucus. So she's out there doing both, which we all do as small business owners. But I'm welcoming everyone and saying to you, listen, do your diligence. Even though I see and hear on the TV and the media, all types of media, that the numbers of people getting infected have gone way down, or I don't want to misspeak here, but I think it's infected have gone down. New cases have gone down 50%, but they're still talking about something like 1,500 Americans dying daily, just because you don't see them. It's kind of like boiling a frog at a slow boil. It's like, yeah, he'll sit in there, but he doesn't realize he's being cooked. He ain't gonna make it. And that's what it's like. It's not a big incident. Just people just keep passing before their times. And the people who are out there, who are left without mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, grandparents, friends, and family, it's a terrible impact. And just everything else that has to do with the economy and everything that's gone on with that has had a really deleterious effect on the world, not just the United States. So folks, do what you can. Hopefully you'll do what I've suggested. You'll get your vaccination. You'll continue to wear your mask in the right environments, and you'll continue the social distance, and you will continue to make sure you're disinfecting your hands and where you are when you're out there, because it's not over. Just because it slows down doesn't mean it's not over. But folks, let me go on to the next thing and talk about a little bit that's happening in Virginia. And still more of the same. We just went through an election back in November. We're still kind of, reacting to the losses and celebrating the victories. And as we do that, we have to continue to remember that there's changes that are happening as a result of both losses and victories here in Virginia. So just talking about the things also that have happened and changed in the state with redistricting. These redistricting, what that really kind of means is each state has congressional districts on a federal level, but they also have those same sort of districts for their state representatives. That would be the delegates, that would be the state senators, and after the census happens, the political folks get together, the people you elect, and they make a map that lays out how they have to sort of reapportion, hopefully fairly, but in a lot of cases not fairly around the country, whether they're adding districts or removing districts, all that happens when you change the district lines. And that determines who you're going to have an opportunity to vote for where you live in your district, whether it's federal or state. So it's important that you vote in every election, because you could have people making decisions that you don't agree with and don't care about you or any of the things that you support and believe that are important. Voting is important, particularly here in Virginia. Virginia, we have elections every year. We're not like other states. So if you live in Virginia, hey, you other 49 states, consider yourselves lucky, because here in Virginia, it just don't stop. The party don't stop. It keeps going on and on and on. So there's constant vigilance that needs to happen. There's constant vigilance why you need to get out there and pay attention to these things, because most of the things that affect you are really affecting you at a state and local level. Eventually you get to the federal level, but who's representing you here in your neighborhood from a state perspective, and locally, if you have a mayor or you have a supervisor, whatever your local elected person is called, they have more direct effect on your life than these other folks do. So vote. Doesn't take you that long to do it. And guess what? You know now why I always talk about my favorite subject. And my favorite subject is voting rights, because that is basically foundational to a democracy. And it is something, if you don't have, then you don't have people who represent the things you believe elected in the Congress. So I've talked a little bit about voting rights. You know, I didn't get to say my favorite thing, Woke Wednesday, but I'm just going to call it Woke Tuesday. Woke Tuesday and the celebration of African American History Month. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about some of those things too with African American History Month. Let's do a little bit of the celebration. You know, African American people and Africans have been involved in business for over 4 millennia. That's over 4,000, 5,000 years. Actually created all of these trade routes, which a lot of other places and other kingdoms and states in Africa and other countries outside of Africa have benefited really from the resources that come from there. And, you know, I won't get into the whole story about, you know, how African Americans ended up here, but hey, we are where we are now. But guess what? Keep on pushing. Things are changing, and people are continue to take care of themselves and their family, and that's what that whole voting right thing is about. So what I'm going to do now first is kind of get on top of my information, so I can present you with what I want to present you with. Okay, wait a minute. Oh, I know what I want to do. See, when I'm doing my self-producing, I get a little behind. I'm going to show you a short little video clip about a gentleman who's an unsung hero and in African American history. So stand by as I bring this short video up for a gentleman by the name of David Walker. And we're going to play a short video, and then I'll talk a little bit about him. Yes, that was a short video without words. Blame me. Blame me for not having more of the some sort of information in the background on that. But what I'm going to do instead now is bring up this chart that you saw the video on, and I could play it again, but I'll bring up the chart. And here is the chart that I really want to tell you about. I came by this gentleman. It was sort of interesting how I came by him, because David Walker is considered an unsung hero in African American history, because first he was born in around 1797. He lived to 1830, and he was a courageous visionary, an African American leader and activist. He put his life on the line by publicly demanding that the immediate end of slavery in the new nation of the United States. And the reason why they say he put his life on the line, because he did this back in 1820. And most people have never heard of this guy, David Walker. And he should be a household name because he's sort of in 1820 is well before the Civil War happened in the United States. 1820 is well before people like Marcus Garvey in the 1930s. And he's considered to be sort of the unsung early leader in abolitionists. You can read about David Walker's life in his famous anti-slavery tablet that he wrote. It's called Walker's Appeal to Colored Citizens of the World, and his influence that he had on the abolitionist movement. And what you see in this picture here that is shown on the chart here is one, nobody has a picture of David Walker. That's why you see this question mark that's here. And so they also show a picture of his son and they say his son looked a lot like him. He was from Massachusetts. He lived in Boston. And the document that you see here is the document that I just mentioned was called the Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, and that he actually wrote and was released in 1820 to all sort of media at that time. And people were just very impressed with what Mr. Walker had to do. And he was a forerunner to major abolitionists that came after him. Remember, he did this in 1820, and that was well before the Civil War started in 1860. And between 1820 and 1860, of course, you have between 1820 and 1860, 40 years of abolitionist activity that led and helped support what eventually President Abraham Lincoln did when he tried to stop the other states from actually leaving the Union. And it is a very interesting history. There's a website link that you'll see on there. So if you want to back up your YouTube or freeze whatever it is you're watching on social media, you can go in and see that URL that's at the bottom of the screen there. And I'll show it to you real quick again. That URL is right here. It says http://www.davidwalkermemorial.org. And that's how you can go back and see the information regarding what's in that document and why he is an unsung hero. But as an ancestor, we're celebrating David Walker now for all the good work that he has done, and just letting people know why American history is important. And all the people who played a role, both people who are unsung and people who did fantastic things and got really no notoriety for their effort for just really trying to do the right thing. So as I move on here, I'm going to talk a little bit about my favorite subject because I like to roll right into it. We only got about 5 minutes to cover it, and I never know who's watching, but I want people to basically understand what's at stake with voting rights. So let's talk about H.R. 4, right, shall we? That is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Basically, what this act does, it's been passed on a federal level in the House of Representatives, which basically puts back into place the pre-clearance requirement in the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Basically, pre-clearance means if there's going to be any changes to anything to do with voting rights for Americans, it has to get pre-cleared through the Department of Justice, and it also has to happen at least 180 days before any election. Essentially, this pre-clearance piece is the heart of the Voting Rights Act, which prevents people from doing all kind of mischievous things that were done with making people recite the Constitution, poll tax, making people do all kind of things. Have to know how many jelly beans are in a jar, voter intent, just all kind of things that will stop people from just having unfettered access to the voting polls in this country. And that has to go with not just that, but as I bring up one of the other acts that followed this that got passed in the House of Representatives, you'll understand. But really, prior to that, after the Reconstruction period, this law was so important because the laws that were in place basically precluded everyone who was African Americans from voting, not just through laws that were on the books, but also through extra-terroristic activities and illegal activities with from white nationalist organizations, and also from organizations like the KKK, or just unorganized people who just didn't want to let African Americans have the right to vote. So what we're going to talk about next, just to remind people, is also HR 1, and that is the For the People Act. The For the People Act was passed in of 2021, and what that included was expanding people's access to vote by automatic and same-day registration, 2 weeks of early voting in all states, banning purging of the voter polls, restoring full protections of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which is the pre-clearance piece that was taken away in 2013. But the good news about that is the reason why you're seeing these new bills is I just stopped for a second because the Supreme Court is basically saying we're taking it out because we don't think it's necessary anymore. At least 5 justices ruled that way. So if you don't think it's so, basically what the decision was, then just pass another law and it'll be back in place. And that's what we're currently trying to do. Not only put the pre-clearance piece back into place for all Americans and all people who are eligible to vote in the United States and all territories, we're trying to even make sure it's even more easier to vote. Let me tell you about the other things that are included in this For the People Act. Finance reforms, banning of foreign money loopholes, additional election security, and also trying to prevent and get rid of gerrymandering by people doing that on a partisan basis, make sure that it's something that is independent and no one political party has total control over that process where people are gerrymandered through redistricting. And that's what the redistricting thing is all about. They gerrymander redistricting piece. So either if you're of one particular group, let's just say whether you're all Democrats or you're all African Americans, rather than you having 2 different districts, what they do is they pack all those people of the same kind into one district, therefore reducing the number of representatives they have, therefore reducing the number of votes in the United States Congress, because population-wise and district-wise, and based upon the census that's taken every 10 years, they would have more votes because there's more people, and more votes in Congress means that you have additional Congress people or additional delegates or senators at a state level. But one way of getting around that is just pack everybody into one district and draw a crazy map that does that. And because a lot of our communities still, a lot of people who are of a particular group tend to live in the same neighborhood. So they'll just sort of just pack them all into one area and say, okay, that's less votes for them and more for us. And that's really, not only is it unethical and unfair, but they're trying to make it illegal. Now, here's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. Is also they're helping states to replace voting machines and also improving processes for auditing and securing the election results. And because what's going on now with voter suppression, not only they're trying to make it harder for people to vote by having less voting polls in areas where people are, or making those polls so far away. And here's the trick. If there's less polls in the area, you know what that means? You got a whole bunch of people, that are waiting hours and hours in line because there's less polling locations. And then if the polls are not in an accessible area, then people have to really drive a long way. And here's one of the things, and all those things, by the way, if you haven't figured it out, means that's voter suppression, because less people will vote because it's more difficult to get there from their jobs or get there from a transportation standpoint, among other things. Right now, there are over 440 some bills that have been passed in over 43 states with these sort of tactics to reduce the number of people who will actually be able to vote, because this suppression is done not through the old Jim Crow 1.0, but with the new Jim Crow 2.0, it's a way of doing things in a way that just make it unfair, as opposed to people outwardly just attacking people and trying to dare them to come to the polls. So that's what all that is about. Now, the other part too is we also have, by the way, both of those bills, H.R. 1, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and H.R. 1, which is the Freedom, let me show it to you again, which is for the People Act. H.R. 1 has passed the House. And also H.R. 4, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, it also has passed the House. Now, how this thing works is that eventually, you send something from the House of Representatives and it goes to the Senate. Last I checked on this, and I haven't checked recently, is that they also had the Senate Bill 2747, which is the Freedom to Vote Act. And it takes information from both bills, and basically it has things in it allowing for same-day voting registration, establishing automatic voter registration, protecting and expanding the access to voting by mail. And voting by mail is when you hear people talk about absentee ballots, that's what that is. Like some of the laws that they've tried to pass in other states is either eliminating it altogether or making it in a very limited fashion. Result, voting suppression. And also establishing 15 days of early voting, as I said, and including at least 2 weekends. So people, hopefully when people aren't at work, they still can do this on the weekend, because they have to drop those, get the document and drop it off to vote. Restoring voting rights to individuals who have been previously incarcerated automatically, and preventing partisan gerrymandering. We just talked about that. It has to be independent. And also protecting against voter intimidation, people just outright trying to intimidate you physically or via other methods from actually going to vote. And of course, putting that whole pre-clearance thing back into place for the Department of Justice. So there you go. So you're saying, okay, I know now, Mark, you come talk about it every week, but here's what I need you to do. What I need you to do, the call to action, is for you to call your congressperson and say, I'm aware of these things. Your congressperson listens to you. All these things are not Democratic things or Republican things. These things are American things. Everybody has a right to their opinion. Everyone has a right to promote whatever policies. And that's why we have elections, because people listen to it and the voters make their decisions. Unlike gerrymandering, the public or the voters pick the politicians. The politicians don't pick the voters. Essentially, that's what happens in gerrymandering. And you get to support people who support things you believe in. That's what makes voting rights foundational, like air is to your body. In a democracy, if you don't have unfettered rights to the voting polls, then you won't get any representation for you and your community, wherever you live in the United States or United States territories. It's deciding who gets what policy gets passed, what money gets invested where, whether or not things like the George Floyd Act is going to be, which has the police reform is going to get passed, whether healthcare is going to get passed, whether or not climate control is going to get passed, how much money is going to the Department of Defense versus how much money is going to, I don't know, just name another agency, Health and Human Services, or Department of Education. That is what these guys decide on a federal level, but that's also what they decide on a state level. Because a lot of those resources that go out excuse me, from a federal level get distributed to states. And the governors and the people who are in the state houses decide how that money, one, if it's going to get distributed at all, and two, how it will be distributed. So your vote is extremely important. There are so many people around the world who would absolutely die to have a decision on how things happen in their lives with their families and their children, their loved ones, their communities. We have that ability here in the United States. It's called a democracy. We have what's known as a republic, one man, one vote, or one person, one vote. And through that republic, as people say, you only get to keep a republic if you're willing to fight for it. If you're willing to say, hey, Congressman, I know about these voting rights bills that are out there, and I want to let you know we're watching, so make sure you do the right thing. and make sure that my right to vote is not obstructed in any way. We're watching. So there we go. There's my speech about voting rights. Love to bring it and talk to you folks about it every time because it is so important to what we do. Everything else sort of flows from there. And voting rights is just extremely important. And now I want to take the time because we're about halfway through the show, and I want to bring on our guests. You know, every week, I usually have a guest, and particularly during African American History Week, I'm trying to have, African American History Month. And hey, I'm an African American. I'll probably try to do it all year long, but it's really just American history, focusing on African Americans. Okay, but we have a guest, and we talk about the things like I talked about earlier. And you know what? I forgot to play a video for you, but you know what? I'm going to play this video tomorrow. I just have such a great guest coming on. I'm just excited to have her on the show. And let me tell you who she is. This is Jennifer Carroll Foy. And I should put in front of it, she's state delegate from Virginia, and her name is Carroll Foy. And she also ran for the Democratic gubernatorial primary last year. And just to tell you a little more about her, and she'll of course tell you so much more, but she's just a fantastic person with a beautiful family. I mean, I've had an opportunity to really see her enter into the public sector arena. And when I noticed her, and some very good friends and folks of mine who are also active Americans and active in their civic duties had really gotten behind her. So anyway, she asked me, I said, well, Jennifer, why don't you come on the show? And let me tell you a little more what she does. Now, as a representative from the 2nd District with the Virginia House of Delegates, that's who Jennifer Foy is. I just mentioned it. She's also passed as a representative equal rights amendments for women's equality. She's passed Medicaid expansion to over 500,000 Virginians, 500,000. And that is a heck of an achievement between all the Democrats in both the Senate and the House, and just making sure that our governor at the time, Ralph Northam, signed that legislation. And that kind of gets back to what I was telling you too. That money came from the federal government, but if you don't have a governor and you don't have people in the House who are willing to actually spend that money and make sure people get it, it doesn't really matter what the feds do. I'm sorry, I'm bumping into her promo. Also, she is responsible for stronger protections for women, veterans, and small businesses. She's really did a great job as a delegate, and she also is a dedicated public service, former foster parent, and public defender. And here's one really cool thing about Jennifer. Jennifer is a graduate from the Virginia Military Institute, VMI, a storied military graduate and postgraduate school here in Virginia that is historically all male. So not only is she can defend you in more than one way. Okay, she knows what to do. She resides in Woodbridge, Virginia, with her twin boys. Great family. I'm going to get his name right, Xander and Alex. If I pronounce that right, Jennifer will correct me, and also her husband, Jeffrey. And she's currently running for the state Senate for the 33rd District here in Fairfax County in Prince William County, Virginia. And there's a little information at the bottom here how you can contact her, what her email address and website is. So folks, without further ado, and looking forward to bringing her on, folks, welcome Jennifer Carroll Foy. Hey, I got to put together my clapping audio because
yes, thank you.
Clapping than me, but Jennifer, I'm just glad to have you on the show just to hear you introduce yourself and talk about all the beautiful things that you've been doing as you've been active in the public sphere.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you and have this lively discussion.
Well, let me start off with my first basic question I ask everyone. I let them talk a little bit about themselves, and then I ask some questions. So as I say, the show is informal, it's informative, and it's engaging. That's how we want it to be. So we just want to have a conversation as though no one else is listening. And right now, probably there isn't. Maybe they'll listen later when they get a chance. But people do listen at later time because, folks, we stream live on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on, I'm leaving one out, Facebook. So people see the show, and when they pass it and they hear it, they'll click on it, and I get the statistics on that. We get a few folks out there giving an ear, okay? So, and put some eyeballs out there. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jennifer Carroll Foy, born and raised in Petersburg, Virginia, which is about 30 miles south of Richmond. Proud to say that I am a Petersburgian through and through. Also went to Virginia State University, an amazing historically Black college and university where I received my master's. As you mentioned, I received my undergraduate degree from Virginia Military Institute and graduated as one of the first women to ever walk across that stage. Went on to get my law degree, and I became a foster mom for 8 years. I was a public defender, still do court-appointed indigent work. And yeah, I think being a delegate was one of the highlights of my career, where I was able to keep all of the promises that I made to the people in my district of expanding Medicaid to 500,000 Virginians, ensuring that we increase the minimum wage, because people shouldn't be working 40 hours a week, bringing home $14,000 a year. Reducing the Black maternal mortality rate by making doulas covered by Medicaid, carrying and passing the bill to ban the use of chokeholds by law enforcement officers. You're helping foster kids in a big way. I had a nonprofit to do that. And as a delegate, I was able to expand on that by making it so foster kids can go to their home school and try to get their degree until the age of 22. That expanded the definition of kinship care to where people in a child's social circle, like a church member or a school teacher, can become their foster parent. So we can get kids out of the system and they can find forever families. Doing practical things that matter to everyday people was one of the highlights that I was able to get accomplished down in Richmond. I'm really excited to continue that work. That's why I'm running for the state Senate seat in the 33rd district. It's a newly drawn district that encompasses parts of Prince William and Fairfax. And I have to say that what's glaring is the income disparity. I will be representing some of the poorest communities and some of the wealthiest zip codes, which will be very interesting, marrying the interests of both of all Virginians, especially in the 33rd district, but throughout Virginia together. But there's things that we all agree on. We all agree that no one wants to sit in traffic for 2 hours going 20 miles. So transportation will be, one of my premier policy issues. And of course, making sure everyone can get one job and put food, at least one job, and put food on the table. Our kids are safe and learning and getting world-class education in our schools, that we are protecting our environment by expanding solar in Fairfax and cleaning up toxic coal ash in Prince William County. So these are just some of the things that I'm most excited about doing. And I've dedicated my life to public service, and I have an opportunity to continue that work as the next state delegate for the 33rd district.
That is incredible. And I just have to say to you, when did you start all this? When you were like maybe fourth grade? Because how do you get all this done?
Some people in my family, they joke that I've lived a couple lifetimes, gotten more done under 30 than most people can say they've done in a lifetime. It's just, I don't know how to rest. And I always see that there's work that needs to be done. And when people are hurting, when there's injustice and unfairness is happening, that's when I move, right? I'm very passionate about people and helping where help is needed. I really believe in those things. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? Right?
Well, yeah. Oh God, I'm going to cut you off. We're going to say the last piece.
We can't wait for someone to save us. We have to save ourselves.
That's right. What you're looking for is in the mirror.
That's right. And that means putting, more eclectic voices in the levers of power and in the halls of power to make decisions about things that will impact and uplift all communities in Virginia and not just some.
Well, let me tell you. Let me ask you this question. Right now we lost all statewide offices with the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general. We lost control of the House of Delegates by just a few votes, and we hold on to the Senate. Your strategy coming in, should you win, how would you be able to really have any sort of impact over the next 3.5 years that are left for that? I mean, that's going to be. It's not quite as bad as it used to be when we didn't have any levers of power. But right now, there are no levels at the executive level. There will only be levels that the Senate can kind of get in the way. And of course, I'm answering the question for you. You answered the question.
Mark, you did a great job.
You did a great job asking and answering my own question.
I love it. I'm like, you're like, yep, that's right. It's exactly what you said. At the end of the day, the Senate has become the barrier that's needed in order to prevent a lot of bad things from happening here in Virginia. So we have to protect our progress because we know that we are on the right side of the issues, that our values align with most Virginians, that people want to work one job, put food on the table. They don't want to have to worry about sending their child to school and whether they'll come home or be shot in the back due to a school shooting. Like, those are things that we care about. And I can tell you that as long as we remind voters and Virginians that there are options, that there's one party who believes in the big tent and that we should have the programs to uplift, all Virginians and move Virginia forward. And we want to leave no one behind, that we see people in Danville and, Newport News and in the Shenandoah Valley who are really hurting, who are really struggling. Inflation is real and it's being felt by so many people. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had, and people have said things like, Jen, people want to talk about the Build Back Better bill and the infrastructure bill. I want to know, how are you going to help me pay my gas bill, right? My grocery bill is double what it was this time last year. It took me almost $70 to fill up my gas tank, right? That's what they want to talk about. They want to hear that you have solutions to address those issues. And also, what have you done for me lately? So it is incumbent upon us as Democrats to, get our flowers, to take that victory lap around the track and say, we have done amazing things, and let's educate the public on all the wonderful progressive progress we've made here in Virginia to make your life better and easier and safer for you and your neighbors. And I think that's really important as well. Messaging is very important. So the way that we win go forward is that we localize our messaging and we make sure we run grassroots people power campaigns that brings in different coalitions to help uplift our message and reach the voters so they turn out. The way that we continue to make sure that bad things don't happen and Virginia spirals out of control and becomes the next Texas or Florida, we do that by getting more exciting, inspiring candidates to run for office. And then we get behind those candidates and help them win, and then help them pass policies that's going to make life better for all Virginians.
Well, so that's interesting. So the first thing you're going to do when you get in there is what?
So the first thing that I'm going to do when I get elected, I'm excited to bring so many of our, friends together and talk about what their needs are, because they've changed. COVID has changed things. The economic recession we're just coming out of has changed things. What's important to families right now have changed. I do believe that, COVID is an endemic and no longer a pandemic. It's something we're going to have to get used to living with on a yearly basis, like the flu, and how to transition and how does that make sense for businesses, for families, for schools. But so bringing people together, because I believe in a bottoms up approach. The people closest to the pain should be the ones closest to the people in power to bring change. So talking to them and figuring out what policies you want to see passed that's going to help you start your small businesses and make sure you can sustain and keep your employees on payroll. How we're going to go from, middle bracket for one of the best states to do business to one of the top 5, because that's my goal. Talking to teachers about what else do you need from us. We hear a lot about pay increase, but I'm also hearing about bureaucracy, right? That they aren't able to focus on teaching because they're on lunch duty and bus duty and IEP meetings and all of the other things that we put on teachers that won't allow them to do what they were trained to do. And so all of these things are conversations I'm excited to have, so that way I can bring the best most policies and budget amendments to pass that is going to help the people who are on the ground doing the real work, help make sure that we continue to be the best place for business while also being the best place for workers, and making sure that we're diverse and open and let people know that we are one of the best states to be in.
Well, that brings up a point. Let's talk a little bit of small business now. Since you're on the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus show, and you're also on the show during African American History Month. Now, you know that Virginia, African Americans make up 20% of the population here in Virginia. And you can't really win statewide office without having the African American vote. But in addition to that, African Americans are paying 20%, if not more, of all the taxes that are collected in Virginia. And as I tell people all the time who are small business people, when you're asking for equity and a fair share of what your government's resources are, because they all have to, governments don't make or produce anything, they produce policy. Everything is done by business folks here in the state of Virginia. And they have to go out and buy those services or those products with your tax money. And small business in Virginia, the acquisition laws need to be fair in a sense that at least 30% or 20%, as I see it, of those resources should be spent equitably amongst the same number that community represents. What are you going to do if we have folks who are out there who are basically saying, yeah, you're not giving, I would say, I don't want to use the word giving, but you're not spending equitably with all of the different communities who put money into the pot. How can you fix that?
Yeah, you can fix it in a number of ways. One of the biggest complaints that I hear from when I talk to small businesses is the lack of access to capital, and making sure that our businesses who do a lot of business with cash transactions, they may not have the established relationships with banks to get the larger loans. We saw some deficits when some of the loans were given on the federal level. They missed the mark on the people who needed it the most. And it's oftentimes because they don't have those relationships. We're talking about the food trucks. We're talking about the barbershops. We're talking about the beauty salons. We're talking about a lot of these businesses. And making sure that we have a targeted approach when we're allowing businesses to have access to capital is something that's really important. But not only give the access to capital, but also give the resources that need to come with that, which is mentorship. Having the free resources available, saying we have organizations that will help you build out your business plan, who will tell you exactly where you have to go to pay your taxes, to get your business license, to do all the things that you need. Because that's another thing that I'm hearing from small businesses, is that we need a better one-stop shop portal in order for them to have access to the information, so we can streamline things as much as possible. But then us as a government, we could do more things to bring the businesses to, for example, small women and minority-owned businesses. So one of the things I think we should definitely do is have a commitment that 45% of all goods and services that we purchase as a state will come from SWAM businesses. It's pretty well known that only 2 out of the last 20 years have the marker been met to exceed what the current goal was in the past. But that's why it's going to take the intentional effort of the people down in Richmond going forward to say, we have to put mechanisms in place to find out where the issues are, and so we can address them in a real way. So that way the SWAM businesses can have equal and leverage opportunity to gain access to these government contracts. Making sure to enforce our wage theft laws. I passed a bill to end wage theft in Virginia. That was something that's definitely hurting SWAM businesses, because they're being outbidded by unsavory contractors who's not classifying their workers properly or not paying them totally and underbidding on these contracts. So these are some of the things that's been put in place, some of the things that we can do to help make sure that small businesses are thriving, because I do believe that they're the economic engines in Virginia, and we have to protect them. And once you have a robust, small business and middle class, that's how you really have the best economy and the best state.
Well, I agree with that. And I think that you're saying to me, and I agree. I know Virginia has a program for folks who are looking all over the country and all over the world. SWAM has to really do with the different constituencies of small business, woman owned, veteran owned, African American, Asian, Latino owned, veteran owned. That's kind of all in that class of small businesses. And in the spirit of African American History Month, I think you're going on the right road, but some of this stuff we kind of already know. Speaking specifically of African Americans and their population here in this state, and saying, listen, we need legislation that will specifically say of services and of products that you're purchasing with state tax dollars in Virginia, you have to spend X amount of money with African American owned businesses. And I kind of like to get away from the term people of color and all that, because people kind of speak in generalities. Nothing wrong with saying Asians, Latinos, or anyone else. But when you want to get down to brass tacks and when you're writing legislation, you have to be very specific. If you look at this on a federal level, you have a program that's called the Alaskan Native Alaska Native Corporations, or specifically back in the day, Senator Ted Stevens, I believe his name was, wrote legislation from Alaska that basically addressed specifically Alaskan Native tribes, and that they were going to have these particular opportunities by U.S. federal code. And they didn't start talking about people of color, because I'm sure there was other colors in Alaska. So what I'm trying to be very specific on is saying the state needs to say, we respect all what African Americans have done for the state of Virginia and the country. And as a result of what they put into the system, we are saying this percentage of services and products will go to them, period. That sort of specific language needs to go into legislation so that when companies see state acquisition organizations or bad actors not doing what they want them to do, they have something that they can actually sue over, saying, here's a state law that says you should be doing this, you're not doing it, we're suing you for this, and we're pressing you to do the right thing with our attorneys. So this is the sort of thing in the spirit of African American History Month where I want people to speak very specifically on that. I don't like them to talk around it, because they've been talking around it for literally decades. So, and I'm not accusing you of talking around it, but I'm simply saying, and I know you got a race to run. But as a small business caucus chair, who basically represents many different small businesses underneath Democrats across the state, and in the spirit of African American History Month, I'm talking specifically about this right now. And so I guess I hear you saying to me, or saying to folks out there, is that you're working in that vein to try to get things done to make it better for African American owned small business in the state of Virginia.
Yes, that's correct. So yes, I passed a bill a little while ago that actually even said for small women and minority owned businesses that their bids on utility contracts can be up to 3% higher than everyone else's bid, and it still has to be deemed reasonable and prudent. So it's still competitive, because we all know that it takes a little bit more time and resources for businesses to get established and have the type of money and bargaining power that they otherwise would. And so that's a bill that passed, and that's something that's very targeted, right? And when I talk about having these access to resources, it really is keeping in mind the fact that the policies that were put in place in the past were very racial and very racialized and very intentional. And so for us to address it, the policies that we put in place to rectify it has to be anti-racist and very intentional. And
Well,
so
you speak. Well, I don't want to cut you off, but you speak exactly the right thing, because I'd like to tell this story to folks about companies like that federal major prime contractors that were put under certain decrees by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the federal government that if you don't hire more people in these categories, we're going to take this contract from you. And literally these major contracts are worth hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. And guess what? Overnight, Jesus, man, they were, all these people who they claimed they could never find, they found. Okay. So, but that is what the power of our representatives and the power of the law will do. And guess what? The country has been immensely better for it because now people are employed, they're paying taxes, everybody's benefited from it, from the federal, state, and local and private economy. So being equitable, it's a win-win-win for everybody.
It is.
Here. Yeah.
It is. It absolutely is. And you're right. And once we start acknowledging and demanding it, that's where you start to also see a lot more changes. You know, you even see it in the law profession. There were very few Black partners in law firms. And then you started seeing businesses demanding it, requiring it, and saying you need to have X amount of employees who are a minority status or X amount of African-American partners. And if you don't, why don't you? And then it forced these law firms to go out and intentionally recruit, right? And it's that intentionality that has to happen because at the end of the day, you know, racism, discrimination, bigotry, all these things are real. And these are things that we're going to feel the effects of for a long time until and unless there is serious and intentional things that happen to undo the hurt and harm that's been placed upon so many, you know, people of color and especially African Americans.
Well, as I tell people, it's not a zero-sum game. One person doing better doesn't mean someone else has to do worse in order for you to do better. Sort of the theme that, you know, people say, Jesse used to love to say, a rising tide raises all boats. Well, I don't know. Some of them boats been getting stuck at the bottom. So
yeah, there is a huge difference between equality and equity. And that's really what we have to talk about. We're not trying to have many more conversations about equality. What we're really talking about is equity. Because when you talk about equity, you're talking about the reality of the fact that African Americans have been shackled for 200 plus years. And then for you to then say shackles off when everyone else had a 200-year head start, well, that's not equality, right? That's not equity either.
Equality. That's not equity.
That's not equity. Yeah, that's equality now because everybody's not shackled, but it's not equity, right?
Exactly.
And so that's what we really have to focus on, is that our conversations all have to be around equity and how is it that we are going to address the intentional thing that's been done. It's not fair to say, okay, now African Americans, you can live wherever you want, when we have had to bear the burden and brunt of redlining for generations, and our home property values have been next to nothing for so long, and having to take out these extreme amounts of debt because we don't have generational wealth to be able to pull from. All of these things are the things that we're constantly fighting against. So yes, equality is not the answer. To now say you have access is not the answer. We're not all on the same footing. It's about equity and not just equality.
Well, there's two other things I'd like to bring up with you, and there's two big. We're down to our last 6 minutes, but I want to talk to you a little bit, particularly in Virginia. I really want to take my hat off and give a huge round of applause to voting rights in Virginia. We have the most progressive voting rights in the laws in the country. I don't think anybody is near us, maybe California, and so good we got our own selves voted out of office, right? So you don't hear the other side talking about unfettered access to the polls. Virginia's got the most progressive voting.
Yes. They worked a little too good, right?
A little too good, right? Yeah, and of course, we didn't complain. We got a shot next time around. But
we want everybody who is eligible to vote fair and free access to the ballot. That's right. Which is really strange to me. So when you win under these, great, voting rights, I mean, shouldn't everyone be for it, right? It's not preferential to any party or political affiliation. It's about everyone having free and fair access. And it's really about who has the best ideas and get their people to the polls, right?
Amen. That's what it's about. That's really what it's about. Nobody's saying, hey, I won, but, the laws were just too open.
Yeah. It was too easy.
I want this other person to have the position, right? So
That's
it's
right.
ridiculous.
That's right.
It makes no sense. But let me bring up the two other things. I've had lots of people on the show in Virginia. One of the big things that's happening for small businesses is the cannabis laws. Now, I've had a number of national personalities, folks like Dist Johnson and some local personalities and professionals in this area. Her name, excuse me, Dishita, I messed up. Dishita Dawson. Okay. And also I've had on her Paul McLean and a few other folks who have been in this industry. This is a huge gold rush right now. And the equity piece that we're talking about that's happening with these laws that are being taken place. Well, one that have already happened. I won't go over that, but the laws that are happening in the Senate now may possibly go to this governor's desk for signature, whatever. What are you going to do, and how much knowledge do you have about these cannabis equity laws that are getting ready to be passed so that you could make sure that communities where these laws have been used so in the past to punish and unequally against the African-American community, now that it is legal, expungement is key, healthcare is key, and also equity is key to either from an employment standpoint or a startup business standpoint, that there are specific items in the Virginia law that's going to be passed in these areas that to make sure that African Americans get a fair shake in this area.
Absolutely. So, as the first public defender ever elected to the Virginia General Assembly, I know a lot about the deficits that we have in our laws when you talk about not only marijuana, but drugs in general. And
Right.
so there has been a failed war on drugs. It has disrupted generations of people, especially African Americans, because they were targeted in a very intentional way on our failed war on drugs. And the repercussions will be felt for many generations to come. So going forward, now that the decision has been made to legalize small possessions of marijuana for personal use, everything has to be seen through an equity lens. So number one, there needs to be expungement and not sealment of records, right?
Mm-hmm.
All people who are currently in jail for solely possession of marijuana for personal use charges or convictions, those cases should be revisited, and those people should definitely be released. And when you're giving out the licenses to actually start selling marijuana, that has to be seen through an equity lens as well. And a certain portion of those licenses should be allocated towards people who have been convicted of doing what we now on a random Tuesday say it's now legal to do.
And I don't want to interrupt you, but language is important here. Excuse me, my technology is going off.
Mm-hmm.
But cannabis.
Yes.
People, that term marijuana is not really used in the industry. It's called cannabis. But go ahead.
Yes. So. Yes, the colloquial term is marijuana or cannabis, and so we can say cannabis. And so at the end of the day, a lot of these things are under attack now in the General Assembly. I know that there was a bill that was proposed to remove the equity portion, that 30% of all revenues that came from cannabis sales supposed to go towards an equity initiative, and that equity initiative was allocating those revenue funds towards communities that have been most hurt and harmed by the prohibition of cannabis here in Virginia. So there's an intention by some Republicans that they don't want us to address the past hurt and harms that these laws have caused, and that's truly unfortunate, because to ignore that is to ignore what's right in front of you, that there's unfairness, there has been injustice, and there has been harmed cause, and it needs to definitely be addressed. And it is not fair that a large group who have historically been African American has been targeted from these cannabis crimes, and now it appears is that the people who want the people to profit are
large multi-state operators that are coming from out of the state with literally hundreds of millions of dollars, looking to get all the initial licenses first and basically knocking out the same thing we talked about in the acquisition laws.
There you go.
This has to be addressed not only in the Virginia acquisition laws, but also in the laws that cover the new laws in the cannabis industry. Because this is an opportunity for people, not just for W-2 people or 1099, because the largest part of this industry that this state is getting ready to allow has nothing to do with really the dispensaries per se, where you would buy something with THC in it. It's really everything that surrounds it, from cybersecurity to transportation to legal to you name it, healthcare, all of this stuff. The CBD industry and the health industry portion of this business is bigger than the dispensary business. And this is the sort of thing, and that's really the pharmacological piece of this business, which is, as you know, is huge in this country. And how these products now can be sold that will provide some competition to other areas that they traditionally really, but that's a subject for another time. But glad to, hoping you will continue to just educate yourself on that, and that the caucus and other people who are working hard in this area will continue to be a resource. We'd like to be a resource to you or whoever wins your election to make sure you understand what's going on in the Senate.
Sounds good. Look forward to working and partnering with you guys going forward.
It's 8:01, and I'm trying to stay honest. But what I try to ask people, Jennifer, I'm going to break my own rule here, because I got one more thing I want to ask you about that's important. And there's lots of important things, but let's talk about education for a minute, and let's talk about student debt and the resources that states have traditionally provided to undergraduate and community colleges and vocational schooling, because it was good for the state and good for employers in the state to make sure that people could afford to go to school without coming out, as they presently have been in the last 20 years, with huge amounts of debt. And that really comes from the states putting a lot less in, next to nothing, or nothing, same amount they put in 20 years ago. And there's other issues with that too. But what can you do to help Virginia residents and Virginia small businesses to make sure that they're getting people who are not in debt, who can afford to buy homes after they get out of college or graduate school, and are getting vocational and certificate training in the right technology and other fields, so that they can become taxpayers in Virginia and keep that circle going. Right now, it just seems as though people are being put into debt peonage, which is the same thing I would call down in the South as sharecropping. You never get out of this debt, or by the time that you do, a whole lot of people are ill-affected by so much debt related to education. Are we making a big enough, the way or somewhat fix the healthcare by those 500,000 people you got healthcare coverage for? What about these parents and students? Because people call it student debt, but what they realize is it ain't just student debt, because most of these loans are signed by the parents. It's really parents and students' debts. How can you help as a state senator?
All right, let's see.
To ask a question.
I was like, okay, question 4. Let's see. All right. So the question is, how do you help the Virginians with student loan debt? So a number of proposals has been brought forth. I believe it was Delegate Marcus Simon who's been pushing for student loan refinance options. And that has not been able to make its way through the General Assembly. For me, there are the people who now have debt, and then you have the people going forward. So thinking about the people going forward, so our future generations don't have to incur the same, mountains of debt that people of the past have had. I was proud to support Governor Northam's initiative for the G3 program, the Get a Skill, Get a Job, Give Back, where if you are low to moderate income Virginian and go to a community college and major in a high demand area, that you get pretty much your degree for free. And so that is an amazing way for people to major in nursing, cybersecurity, early childhood education, public safety, and be able to graduate from or come out of a community college and pretty much walk away with no debt and entering a good or high-paying profession.
But
That's
that doesn't
what we need more
I want to interrupt you, but what does that do with all of our 4-year schools and all our graduate schools?
Yeah, so that is a program through the community college. Now, the way that the way that we deal with the institutes of higher learning, your four-year universities and greater, is something that we've been doing in the past, which is basically say, hey, the state will give you X amount of funding, but only if you do not increase your tuition rates. So that's where the state steps in and basically pays what the students would otherwise pay if the schools were allowed to increase their tuition. So it's a way for us to keep the cost low. But there also has to be other conversations that's had with these institutes of higher learning. They are really focused a lot on encouraging out-of-state students to come to our Virginia schools, which we want. However, the lure to get them here is becoming more competitive every single year. Who has, the best, workout facilities? Who has, a wall climbing, facility? Who has the best food? And these things cost, but they're trying to make the schools more attractive for all of these other out of school students to come to pay out of state tuition, but all of us are fronting the cost for this. And so instead of talking about how to get kids educated well, educated quickly and inexpensively, we are having other conversations about how can we have the best facilities, the best programs, and it's becoming more of an entertainment venue than it is an educational facility. So those are the conversations that we really have to have. And I understand the plight that a lot of these schools are in. I understand it's happening. So you kind of have to keep up with the Joneses in order to keep your doors open and keep students to continue to attend. But at the end of the day, it's becoming unwielding. It's something that we can't continue to keep track with. And so those are the conversations we really need to have. But one of the major accomplishments I was proud to be a part of is fighting for historic funding going to our HBCUs than ever before in Virginia, giving them the money that they need so that way we can have more research and development programs at our HBCUs where the next great idea is going to happen. It could come from a historically Black college and university, making sure that they are on the cusp of technology and everyone is able to be connected to the broadband, that they have better facilities because some of our HBCUs, their buildings are 60, 70, 80 years old. And so that's what's important. And those are the conversations I'm excited to have.
Well, the only one thing I would add to that, and of course I have a lot more to add, but I definitely want to bring up the question of the banks. The schools cannot get the money unless the banks are willing to give the money to the students, the parents. Because anybody who's ever filled out a FAFSA form understands everything changed back in 1996 when students were no longer able to go independent. Like when I graduated from, I'll shout out my Hampton Institute or Hampton University. I don't like that new name, my alma mater, because you were able to go independent with the federal government. And you could get a national student direct loan without your parents being involved. You would get a tuition assistance grant from the state of Virginia because if you went to a private school, that's money you were paying in taxes and they gave you if you didn't go to a state school. And of course, whatever money your parents wanted to be able to try to help you out. Now, you did not have, and the government controlled those loans, those $2,400 loans, as soon as they let Wall Street in. And the schools found out, connecting it back to what you said earlier, well, I can't charge $40,000 or $50,000 a year if there's no money there for it. But Wall Street was happy to provide the money because these loans were non-cancelable. But the level, the height or the level that it would take for you to be able to cancel a student loan is so high that very few people can get out of it. And so a lot of people are impacted and parents are impacted by these loans because they're oftentimes, they're signed as the guarantors for these loans. So you can go to the banks and say, listen, you want some of this financial business here in the state? You want some of this wealth management business in the state? You want some of this money we have for our employees managing their 401ks and other things? You need to fix these student loans. You need to cancel some of this debt for our Virginia residents. They shouldn't be there cutting deals with them to bring more deals in while the people who actually, the middle class folks, are stuck with this really bad deal. And this is the same reason when we talk on a federal level, the same thing when we talk to, the folks in Washington. I know that you're not running in Washington. the same sort of thing about student loan debt. So we're making some noise about it because it affects small businesses. It affects our industries because I got people that I can't hire because they're not buying new homes, they're not doing this, they won't buy other products and services because they're settled with $2,000, $500 in some cases, between those two numbers in debt in their early 20s and goes on into their mid 30s. That's ridiculous. So I appreciate your interest in that area. I'm hoping that maybe because we need to get our state and local folks involved in this fight. It's not just a federal fight. It's also a state fight. I'm glad to know that hopefully you can help out in whatever way you can. Mm-hmm. Small business would appreciate it. Man, I like talking to you, Jennifer. But listen, and let me close out the two things I always close out with our folks is what about if you were queen for a day and you could wave a wand, what is your personal project that you would like to see get done? That's a question I ask everybody at the end.
If I was queen for a day and I could wipe out one thing, I would wipe out poverty. When you think about everything, that's where it stems from, whether it's crime, whether it is, being able to not go to school, whether it is, no matter what it is, it's one of the top reasons for, people ending, their marriages. I mean, just money and poverty just links to so many of these things. Your livelihood, your lifespan is tied to poverty, right? If you look in, for example, in Prince William County, there was a study that came out that said if the people on the west side of the county, they live an average of 15 years longer than the people on the east side of the county. Right. So that's where poverty is intersectional with pretty much everything. So if you can rid yourself of poverty, I mean, there's so many other issues that would naturally resolve and go away. And I think that it's immoral. I think it's unjust. And I think poverty is violent. And seeing it up close, having to go to bed hungry and feel those pains and not wanting anyone else to ever wonder where their next meal is going to come from, or having a safe, clean place to rest their head. I think that is the litmus test of how successful a society is. And we have a long way to go.
Well, you want to give out any public social media handles, how people can get in contact with you or your campaign?
Absolutely. Please go to jennifercarrollfoy.com. That's jennifercarrollfoy.com, and check out my website, and where you can read up on my policies, what I've done, and what I look forward to doing. You can also go to my social media at Twitter at jcarrollfoy, and my Facebook, I believe, is Jennifer Carroll Foy as well.
Wow, fantastic. Hey, we're welcoming you and loving you being here to the Virginia Democratic Small Business Pocket Show. Whoa, it was a fantastic conversation with Jennifer Carroll Foy. And Jennifer, we're looking forward to having you back here again.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thank you so much for coming out and being with us.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
Moving on up. See you, Jennifer.
See ya.